All season long, I talked about the Clippers not taking the regular season seriously. And after the season, Lawrence Frank seemed to agree by saying going into next season, that's one thing they have to fix. Going to be joined by Clipper beat writer Joey Linn to figure out 3 ways we can help make the regular season better on today's Locked On Clippers.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You are locking in with the Clips. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day, your team every day. I'm your host, Darian Vaziri, going into my 19th season as a Clipper fan. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DimeDropperPod and subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, and Locked On Clippers, free and available on all your favorite podcast platforms, including YouTube, where I want you to comment a way that you think we can help make our regular season process better next season. And joining me, very happy to have a guest. I've been trying to get him on for a while. Started out as just a fan tweeting about the Clippers, and now in the locker room for SI Now, correct?
Yes, sir.
SI Now, Joey Linn, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on, man.
I appreciate you having me, man.
So first off, before we get into it, I just want to say, man, how did it feel actually being in the thick of it? You know, as someone who's just was a fan. You said Craig Smith, I believe your story was. Craig Smith got you into the Clippers in 2009. But yeah, how was it actually being there?
My story is kind of unique. So Craig Smith was the first player I ever met, but it was Brian Cook. We had a mutual family friend that got me connected there. Cookie had married somebody that was really close to my family, and so we just got to know them through that. And then Craig Smith was the first player outside of Cookie that I met, and then of course they drafted Blake the year after that year, and I fell in love with basketball because of him. So that's kind of my story. But yeah, in terms of just me kind of evolving that into what I'm doing now, it's been so much fun, man. And I think I've said it a few different places, but I kind of allowed myself to really take it in and enjoy that unique access of going from a fan to a reporter for maybe about a day or two. I really allowed myself to take in that first media day. That was kind of a big day for me. And then after that, I kind of took in training camp for like a day or two, like, wow, this is really cool seeing these guys up close. But after that, I was like, all right, it's time to act like I've been here before, make it a job. And, I think I've learned a lot over the past year in terms of how to do that well. I'm still getting better. There's things that I look back at last season I could have done better, and I think I will do better next season. But it's been fun, man. It's a great group of guys. The Clippers are great as an organization, so being able to be around all those great people every day has been super neat.
I feel you, man.
There we go.
Yeah, no, I know. I feel you, man. That sounds awesome. But so the first topic that you wanted to get into was re-signing Russ. So the point guard conversation has been really loud this week. Obviously, the Malcolm Brogdon trade going through and then not going through. CP3 was mentioned for a bit. Now that's out of the table or off the table because he's gone to the Warriors. But I want to ask first, why re-signing Russ is such a big priority in your opinion? And also, one thing I noticed just like by following your stuff is that your coverage of Russ was really good, really positive. A lot of Russ fans seem to like you, and you were one of the Clipper media members that really was showing the side of Russ that we didn't necessarily see across the hall. So I want to ask you also, what was your perception of Russ? Because I know you really like Steph Curry, but I wanted to say, what was your preference or opinion of Russ before he was on the Clippers, and how did that maybe evolve as you got to be around him?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, I obviously just wrote a pretty extensive article about this topic where I was breaking down why I think it's important to bring Russ back. And I felt like it was a unique topic to hit on for this particular episode because obviously you're asking the question, how do you improve the Clippers regular season process? And one of the things you could count on from Russ is that he's going to be available. So you're going to have him in the mix. And this is obviously a team who needs continuity, needs availability. And he's also going to bring it every single day. And that's another thing that we saw this team struggle with. And I mentioned it in my article. I don't know if this was just actual complacency or just the product of an old and injury riddled team. But if you watch the Clippers last season, there was certainly a lack of urgency that persisted far too often where a guy like Russ, you bring him into the mix, and not only is he going to bring it himself, but he demands that of his teammates as well. And that's something that from Ty Lue on down, everybody spoke about. Really was probably the first thing that people brought up on the Clippers when talking about how important that addition was. So that element of things is something that I don't think the Clippers are going to find somewhere else, because you can have a guy who brings it every single day, but it means more when it's coming from a player like that who's a future Hall of Famer, obviously top 75 all time. It means a lot when you have a leader like that asking that, even of your two stars. So I think for that reason, it's really important to bring him back. But one of the things I also got into in that article was the basketball fit. And I think a lot of people will look at the totality of Russ's time with the Clippers. They'll look at the record, was right around 500. They'll look at some of the on-off numbers, and they're also like kind of about a net even in a lot of different categories. But when you look at the numbers post 5 game losing streak, and the reason why I talk about that is because I mentioned it again in my article. Terance was on a recent podcast, and he said we were starting to figure it out after that 5 game losing streak that came the first 5 games of Russ's tenure. And he said it was just a matter of having not only Russ in the mix, but a brand new team. Obviously, Luke was gone, Reggie was gone, John was gone, bring in Eric, Bones, Mason. They had a lot of different moving pieces, and they had to figure it out. And Terance said, I think we started to actually figure it out after that losing streak. And a lot of the numbers affirm that. I think there's a place for numbers and there's a place for the eye test. And when you mix them in together, I think you actually see some pretty positive trajectory of that group with Russ in the mix after that losing streak. So I think for those two reasons, one, the optimism that a lot of the numbers show, and also just the fact that he is a cultural fit on this team, something that they really need. I really believe they need to have him back. Is there a path to doing that? I think there's a few different ways the Clippers can get creative. That's obviously a topic for another time in terms of how they actually make that happen. But I do think that if the possibility is there for them to bring him back, they need to prioritize that. And I think from everything we're hearing right now, they're going to.
Yeah, I agree on everything you said. I mean, all the listeners, regular listeners, know how big I am on some of the intangible things you mentioned, like the leadership, vocal leadership, just the guy that's going to bring it every single night, but also the availability, which everyone has agreed is something that's huge with Russ. But the one thing I also like too is the big thing people hold against him is the shooting and stuff, but he actually shot the ball pretty well with us.
Mhm.
And that downhill creation and athleticism is something the Clippers really lacked. And when he brings it defensively, like we saw in the playoffs, I mean, I think there's a lot more positive there than negative.
I completely agree. And before I get any further into that, I do want to answer the second part of your
Yeah.
question about my perception of him and growing up and just being a fan of the game. I am a big Steph fan, but what's interesting about my story in terms of just my growth as an NBA fan, obviously I got into the game. I say I got into the game because of Blake, because listen, I was a friend of Brian Cook, family friend of Brian Cook. But let's be honest, like if I just got into the NBA watching Cookie, I mean, how long would I have been a fan? So it was really Blake got me hooked on the game of basketball. So because of that, I was really invested in a lot of the guys who were around his draft class. Because like one of my first major memories of just NBA in general is that 2011 All Star Weekend, where obviously Blake competed in all 3 days. He was an All Star. He was in the rookie sophomore game. He was in the dunk contest. So Steph was obviously part of his draft class. John Wall was the year after, but he threw that bounce lob to Blake in that rookie sophomore game. So like I started following a lot of guys like that. Steph, John Wall. I mean, even Kyrie was 2011. So like that was another guy that I started watching. But Russ, who was a year before Blake, obviously, that was another guy that I started watching as a kid. And as much as I hated losing to those OKC teams, especially in 2014, dude, I loved those OKC teams as a fan. They were so much fun. Those young Thunder teams with Russ and obviously KD, James, those teams were so much fun. So I loved Russ as a kid. And one of my favorite seasons of anybody ever, and I know a lot of people feel different types of ways about this season, but Russ's 2017 MVP season, for me, like I love the way he went out post KD moving to Golden State and just said, this is my team. I'm going to do crazy stuff every single night. And he was so much fun to watch. That was when I really became a big Russ fan. And then everybody knows what happens with the Pat Bev trick y'all comments, right? Like there is no hiding the fact that I'm a huge Pat Bev fan as well.
I forgot
I
about
have
that.
I have a personal affinity for Pat Bev. He was the first NBA player to ever give me real encouragement in this space, to tell me to, continue pushing for this when I was just getting into it. So I love him, and I'm always going to love him. So when Russ said that about him, it hurt me a lot because I grew up loving Russ, and then I developed this love for Pat. But that all got resolved, and Russ and Pat became teammates again, or again became teammates with the Lakers and squashed that. It was like amazing for me because the only beef I ever had with Russ was those comments about Bev. And getting to know Russ more and understanding his feelings towards Bev at that time, it honestly makes more sense to me now than it did then, why he felt that way, obviously with the injury and with everything that had gone on between those two. But to see them squash their beef was like amazing for me as just a fan of the game and a fan of those two guys, because I didn't have to worry about that anymore. But I think one of the things that was interesting for me is that even during that time when I was like, oh man, Russ and Bev have their thing going on, that was when Russ was going through a lot, like with the Lakers and even with the Wizards. People were trying to discredit a lot of what he was doing there because they weren't winning as many games. And when he got selected to top 75 all time, I remember there were some wild takes that people were saying about him. Like, he doesn't belong on this list. He's never won anything. And I remember I have a tweet that I put out and I said, I've had a little bit of a grudge towards Russ for his Pat Bev trick y'all comments, but this was one of my favorite players growing up. I can't stand to see the way people are trying to erase the totality of his career because of some of the struggles that either he or his team had at that time. So that's kind of my history as a Russ fan. But when he signed with the Clippers, I was so stoked because the first tweet I put out was about the opportunity that he now had to leave a toxic environment with the Lakers and their fan base and join a team where he gets to stay in the same place. He doesn't have to move his family. But you know how Clippers fans are. They will love and support you if you go hard for them. Like, Clippers fans will ride for you if you play your heart out for them. And I
even when you don't play your heart out for them, they still may ride for you. That's the crazy part about it.
Well, yes, but that's something that I saw potentially developing with Russ coming over, was an opportunity to actually get love from his hometown, because that was one of the things that was so exciting for him and his family going to the Lakers, was he got to come home, right, and play for his home fan base. And that just completely did not go the way that anybody wanted it to go. So I was stoked about that. And man, like, getting to know him and getting to be around him on a daily basis, like, I was really pleased with the opportunity that I had to just share that with people. Because I mean, Lakers fans in my mentions would, they'd be trying to say, oh, you're only showing this about Russ, you're only saying the good stuff about Russ. I was showing what I saw from Russ every single day. And that was both on and off the court. I mean, this is the type of guy that, cameras aren't technically rolling at this time. Like, I might have my phone out recording at the practice facility, but this isn't like a for the cameras moment where he is hyping up his teammates. He's walking up and dapping up reporters. I posted a video of him, or a picture of him, talking to Andrew Grice's son about his 7th birthday outcome. Like, this is just the stuff that he does on a regular basis, where he just is an amazing person. And I think that that's one of the things that was so unfortunate about his time with the Lakers, because it wasn't just his play that was getting critiqued at that point. They were targeting his character, calling him a locker room cancer, calling him a vampire. They were calling him all types of different things that I personally thought were off limits, even if that was the case, because I just don't think you should be airing out personal business that's going on in the locker room as a reporter. I don't think that's really your job. But it wasn't true, which was the crazy part, is that it was, I mean, completely slanderous. They were coming after him in ways that were just completely off base. So to have an opportunity to show a little bit of truth about who he is as a person was really cool for me, because I didn't have to go out of my way to do it. All I was doing was just documenting what I was seeing on a regular basis. So I love Russ. I had a really cool moment with him after Game 5 when the Clippers got eliminated. I just walked up to him and told him I appreciated being able to cover him this season, because one of the first things I said to him when I first met him was, you're one of the main reasons why I love the game of basketball, because it's true. Like, I told you that story of me just growing up and following all those guys who were around Blake's year. So I reminded him of that again as we were walking out of the arena. And he's like, no, man, I appreciate you. He says it means a lot to be able to have, somebody who, just tells the truth about me and what they see on a daily basis. Because, I mean, there were times with Lakers reporters, and I don't want to call anybody out, obviously by name, but man, like, there would be video surfacing on Twitter of like Russ missing a layup in practice, and like all of a sudden that's going viral. And it's like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? It's just like there were just too many targeted attacks that I felt were just unfair. So to be able to just cover him in that way and appreciate him for who he is was really cool.
Dude, I mean, as a Russ fan from UCLA, because my dad went there, you're gonna make me shed a tear here, man. This is beautiful. This is the type of stuff though that people need to hear, and it's awesome to get that perspective on it because I always heard my entire life watching Russ and hearing about him that he's totally different with the people in his team and the local media than the national media. And honestly, having him on our side now, I can really see that that's true. He just feels this different level of comfort, it seems. And he's one of those guys I can also see, even besides the injury, why he and Pat Bev could go at it, because they're the type of guys that they'll really just ride with their squad and their guys. Like above anything else, it's kind of an us against the world type. And I relate to that a lot. But coming up, the next big thing, more Terance Mann. Just about every single Clipper fan would agree on this one. Going to be talking about that coming up. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right. Now it's time to talk about the main man, the man for the big occasion. Number 14, Terance Mann, who will be entering his 5th season in the NBA. Obviously a fan favorite because of his huge playoff moments. We talk about effort with Russell Westbrook, but that's another thing. Another guy on the Clippers that gives consistent effort every single night, intensity, really cares. I remember there was one time I was sitting next to the tunnel this season, and after it was just halftime, we weren't playing that well. I remember him just slamming the Gatorade bottle, and I was just like, love to see some fire there. Terance Mann, go ahead, since you were the one that said more man. Obviously, I agree, but why do you think it's so important that Terance gets more minutes next season?
Well, obviously, the topic of this podcast was about maximizing the regular season and about improving the regular season process. And this is a guy who does that because, again, one, like Russ, he's available. He has not had extended time, out of the lineup here, and there, a game maybe or two. But I mean, this is a guy you could count on for like 70 plus games every single season. So that alone has value on this team. Just a guy who's going to be there every single day. But again, like Russ, this is a guy who battles, a guy who competes, and a guy who does everything. You're not going to find many players like that. What was it, Mike Malone, who said that specialists don't thrive in the playoffs? It was him who said. I think it was him who said that. Mann is not a specialist. This is a guy who does everything, and I think that's something that you saw a lot of role players in the postseason, both on Miami and on Denver, doing at a high level. Guys who can do more than one thing. And I think that's why Terance has an opportunity to really make a long career for himself as a second round pick because he does everything well. And I think one of the things that's going to be key as well is just getting him a more defined role next season because I know it was tough for him at times. One, with just the minutes, right? Like, I mean, this is a guy who played 4 minutes on opening night and then was starting for stretches of times and then would be out of the rotation again and then would be closing games. So that is tough, but I think they need to find a more defined role for him in terms of how they're using him, not just how much they're using him, but how they're using him. I think he did a great job handling that last year with his role changing so many different times. But I think going into next season, that should be a priority is making sure he knows exactly what's going to be asked of him, at least as close to possible on a nightly basis, because then he could really have an opportunity to elevate his game without having to worry about doing too many different things and maybe not knowing what he's going to be doing on a night to night basis. So I really hope that that's something that they lean a little bit further into next season. In terms of where that comes, I think he'd be a lot of different places depending on what the Clippers do this offseason. If they're able to re-sign Russ, obviously we would imagine is going to be the starting point guard. So that means Terance will not be starting at the one like he did at times last season. Obviously, they could either use him as the backup point guard in that particular scenario. But one of the things that I would actually like to see them try a little bit more is Terance. Again, you could call it the four, you could call it whatever you want, but him playing next to Russ, PG, and Kawhi and Zoo, because I think one of the things that he can do really well in that type of group is he's not going to be an Aaron Gordon in terms of his above the rim ability, although he probably has the best of that on this team outside of Russ. But he can be that type of player where he can knock down, catch and shoot threes. He's an opportunistic cutter. He battles on the offensive glass. He does a lot of those things well that we saw Aaron Gordon doing for the Denver Nuggets. And again, I don't want to say they're the same player because they're not, but just in terms of the way that he can impact the game in so many different ways, I would like to see them maximize that a little bit more next season. We didn't see it very much because obviously, how the power forward situation last year, it didn't really leave a whole lot of opportunity for guys like Terance to kind of get in the mix next to Kawhi, PG, and a point guard and a center. So I would like to see them maybe try that a little bit, but whatever they do, I want it to be consistent. I don't want him to have to be in a situation again where he is not exactly sure what role he's going to be playing on a night-to-night basis, how much he's going to be playing on a night-to-night basis. I think the eye test and the numbers affirm that you are better when you're maximizing his role. So that's certainly something that I'd like to see next season.
It's interesting because I feel like if they did start him alongside those four guys that you mentioned, like when they show the starting lineup in the beginning of the game, it would show him at shooting guard, I feel like. Probably. But I see what you're saying, though. Terance Mann is an opportunistic cutter is a great way to put it. But he shoots the ball from three better than Aaron Gordon, or I think Aaron
Especially on catch and shoot.
Does. Yeah. I mean, he shot 39% from three this year, 38% from three this year. And in moments where teams blitz Paul George, which they frequently do throughout the regular season, teams will blitz Paul George and you get Zoo in that short roll. And I think Zoo has gone a lot better making reads out of that short roll. Having Terance underneath the basket and not just only having shooters out there, 3-point shooters behind the arc, is really effective. It's good to have someone in that dunker spot or a vertical threat. And if Terance has enough space, you can really throw the lob up to him. So absolutely love that. And I said this season, maybe it's a bit much, but I'm obviously like, if you were to say I'm a stan of any player on the Clippers, I think Terance would probably, because I have my own story with him, but 30 plus minutes for me he should be averaging 30 minutes a game to me. That's just because I don't know if we're going to bring in any guy that's some lockdown point of attack defender. I still think Terance Mann will be one of our better ones. And we talked about it this whole episode. Athleticism, pace, these are things Terance Mann brings. He's so good in transition. So just with all the things he does for our team, he should absolutely, to me, be getting 30 plus minutes. But yeah, any last words on Terance before we go to the last one?
I think you brought up a good point about the defense. Obviously, I think there is some improvement for him on that end, but in terms of the current roster makeup, especially amongst the guards, he has the ability to be one of the best on the team in that category. I think that's something that not enough people talked about last season, and I talked about it a lot, but entering the year, probably my biggest concern with the Clippers last year, it wasn't their lack of a backup center, although that was a problem. It was their lack of point of attack defense, specifically amongst their guards, because you enter a season with a guard rotation of Reggie, John, Luke, obviously Terance, whether you call him a guard or not. There were not many yes, exactly. Not many guys who you can count on to really have any resistance at all defensively on the perimeter. So that was a big concern of mine. And it's something that never really got addressed. And I think if you even had, obviously with Kawhi and PG being healthy, but even with just Kawhi healthy, another guard who could have even just come close to what Russ was doing on the defensive end in that first round against Phoenix, you really would have had a chance to give them even more trouble than they did, because Russ was amazing defensively in the first round, but Booker was cooking literally anybody not named Russ in that. It was bad, dude. Like, it was bad. So they needed at least one more guy to step up on that end defensively. And again, while I think Terance has a little bit of a ways to go to where he can get to the point where you can like actually consider him a stopper and a guy that you really trust to be one of your best defenders on that end, he has by far the easiest path to getting there just because of his athleticism, because he battles. He really does have an opportunity to become much better on that end. Whereas, a lot of the other guards that the Clippers have just kind of are what they are at this point when it comes to their defensive ability. So that's something that the Clippers need to look at, in my opinion, pretty extensively, because if you enter next season with the type of point of attack resistance that they had entering last season, it's gonna be really tough, especially for a guy like Zoo who covers for a lot already defensively. And then you start getting into the bench. If they run it back with Mason, we know what that can look like if he doesn't have guards, keeping people in front. So that's a big deal, and I think that's going to be a big next step for Terance, and one that I think that he can make.
Yes, sir. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Coming up, going to talk about the last aspect that the Clippers need to improve to have a better regular season, and that is better communication across the board. Going to be talking about that coming up. All right. So to close it out, you said better communication, and I asked, what does that mean? And you did give me a response on Twitter, but let's do it for the good people out here for Clipper Nation. Better communication. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, going back to the theme of wanting to maximize the regular season and have just overall better regular season process. We know that Kawhi and PG are going to miss games next season. There's going to be scheduled off days for them. There's going to be, obviously times where they get banged up. Hopefully, we're willing. They don't have any, extensive injuries that keep them out, for a long period of time. But even if they're 100% healthy from start to finish next season, there are going to be scheduled off days for them. I think we could say that, pretty confidently right now. So because of that, I think that the Clippers need to do a better job of really communicating when those two guys are going to be out. I think at times they were good with it last season, but we did see, a few examples of where, most notably that Memphis game where Kawhi did not play in the second half. Again, this isn't some breaking news from me. This was, the players who went on the record after the game, and they weren't, openly upset about it or anything, but they did say we didn't know that was the plan going into the game for him to not play the second half. So obviously stuff like that can't happen. You need to understand what's going on at all times. You need to make sure everybody is on the same page. And I think too, if you're able to establish that, it's a weird comparison, but almost in a way of the way the Angels have been handling Mike Trout this season. They've been giving him scheduled off days because they want to try to preserve his health over the course of a long season. And you could go back and forth on whether or not you agree if that's the best approach. But if that is going to be your approach, you need to make sure you have that, pretty mapped out for everybody to understand. So that's one of the ways where the communication can improve next season. But then also, too, just making sure guys are 100%, kind of goes back to what I talked about with Mann, just 100% sure what their role is. And I think, with all the criticism that Ty got last season, that is something that I was able to see, firsthand. I think he did a pretty good job with of, like, every single day before practice, he would pull Bones aside, pull Terance aside, and like he would sit down with them for 10, 15 minutes before practice and talk to them about whatever was going on. Like, for example, when we got Russ, obviously Bones got pushed out. Ty sat down with him. So I think there was a pretty strong element of that last season, but just from some of the frustration that was sensed from guys not being 100% sure what their role was going to be on a night-to-night basis, or just kind of the fluctuating roles, I think it would be important to make sure that guys are 100% in the know on what they're going to be asked. And the reason why I bring that up is because there was a time when Terance had kind of fallen out of the rotation for a while, midway through the season. I could go back in my tweets and find exactly when it was. But I actually asked him, I said, was this one of those times where, Ty sat you down and said, hey, we're going to try few new things out? Or was this a situation where it just kind of happened? And he looked pretty upset, and he said, yeah, it just kind of happened. So, like, there were instances where guys didn't 100% know that, they were going to be losing minutes or their role was going to be changing. And I do think Ty, for the most part, did a pretty good job with that. But just overall, I think, player to player, coach to player, front office to coach, like there can probably be a better just plan going forward in terms of keeping everybody in the loop on what they're trying to do. And I think that'll help alleviate some of the uncertainty that we saw last season with situations like Memphis or with situations like Terance, where guys just aren't 100% sure of what's going on. Because if you can get guys bought into a plan, even if you don't, the fans disagree with what the plan is, or it might not be optimal in terms of maximizing the regular season, if you can get everybody on the same page, you're in a way better spot, regardless of what your plan is, than if you're just trying to, do something on the fly and guys aren't 100% bought in. Because I think that we do have a lot of guys on this team that are adaptable and are open to different things, but they just want to make sure that they know what that is so they can optimize their abilities.
On the Terance thing, my last question is, how come you think that Ty doesn't prioritize him the same way us fans do? Do you think it just comes down to the basketball? He just prioritizes other guys' skill sets more, or what you think on that?
Yeah, so I think it was tough because he never had a really defined position. And when he was playing the point guard, we knew all along that Ty and Kawhi and PG, and again, this isn't some breaking news scoop for me. Like, this was very public information that they wanted a more traditional point guard than Terance. So when he was being classified as a point guard, we knew the whole time that the preference of Kawhi, PG, and Ty was to get somebody who was a more traditional point guard
Right.
in that sense. So that was difficult for him because he obviously didn't have the full backing, everybody involved in that particular position. But when now you make him a forward, it's also tough because there were guys for right or for wrong who were ahead of him in the rotation on the forward side of things. So I think it was that more so than anything that he just never had a real defined position or role, that he kept just kind of being lost in the shuffle. And I'm not excusing that because I think he is a guy who has the ability to play any position, and as we've already talked about on this podcast, should be playing much more than he did on a consistent basis last season. But I'm just trying to give an explanation as to what happened, not a justification, but I think an explanation is just that he never had a truly defined position for really any extended period of time last season.
Hey, fair enough. Hopefully that next season things will change and we see more of Mr. Mann that we all love. But hey, man, this was fantastic. You gave a lot of great insight, and clearly I know you're passionate about the Clips, and you can just tell across the screen. But let people know where they can find you, where they can find your work before we get out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm on Twitter. That's where you'll probably be able to find me most often at @JoeyLinn_. I'm not tweeting a whole lot during the off season. I'm honestly trying to separate myself just a little bit from
I feel you.
social media this summer, man. It was a grind this season. It was my first full season doing it. Took a lot out of me, so I'm just trying to recharge a little bit. But I am on there, every day or two. I'll tweet, and obviously yesterday we had, or by the time this pod comes out, it'll be a few days ago, we had the draft, so I had coverage from that. So if you guys want coverage from anything the Clippers have going on this summer, you can find me there. I do have my own podcast. I've been away from it again this summer, but I'm going to be bringing it back, maybe some point during the summer, but definitely when the season comes back. That's the Clips Combo Show, linked probably my Instagram. But yeah, obviously Twitter is where I'm going to be most active. If you want to follow me there, I'd appreciate it. And again, man, I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, anytime, man. It was fun to finally do this. Hopefully the people on Clipper Twitter or social media that know both of us will enjoy it the most. But you can follow me, Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod. Subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper. You already know the deal. Locked On Clippers. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you know every single time we post a video. Almost at 3,000 subscribers, guys. Come on. Once we get into that 3,000 subscriber range, we're going to be back on the tails of these other NBA teams. And once the season comes around, it's time to show people yet again that Clipper Nation is much bigger than people think. The age-old proverb continues. Go Clippers.